Hey guys, Jake Carlson here, host of the Modern Leadership Podcast. Are you ready to focus on amplifying your leadership superpowers? Let's go! Good morning, my friends and fellow elite achievers. Welcome to Modern Leadership, the podcast where each week we sit down with authors, entrepreneurs, and leaders to explore their journey, diving into the ups, their downs, and ultimately the lessons they learned along the way. Our goal? To show that everything is figure-outable. And today's guest is Arman Sedeghi. Arman is a published author, motivational speaker, entrepreneur, and philanthropist. He is the author of the Business Bible and CEO of six companies. He has advised some of the top CEOs in America on various projects, including Elon Musk of Tesla, Snapchat CEO Evan Spiegel, Ginny Rometty of IBM, Steve Wynn, Meg Whitman, and many others. A husband and a father, he enjoys working hard to help everyone around him get better. And today, he is our modern leadership guest expert. Arman, it's great to have you on today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm excited.
Well, I'm excited. You've got a great background and a great expertise. But before we jump into all of that, give us a little idea from a personal side. Who is Arman?
So, great question. I'm a father of two. I've got two little girls who are 8 and 7 years old. I've been married for about 13 years. I've got an amazing wife who's an attorney. And, I'm a hardworking guy who also likes to play hard and travel a lot. So I enjoy life, and really for most of my life, business has been my passion. And so this is the place that I feel most at home.
Well, clearly business has to be your passion. When I say this, CEO of six companies, but how do you keep it all together? I mean, most of us struggle being a CEO of one company or in vice presidency of one company. How do you keep it all together?
It really is just a matter of the fact that I didn't start six companies at once, right? These six companies were built over a period of 13 years. And as I build a company or I do anything in a company, I'm all about building infrastructure and building the policies, the procedures, the systems, developing key performance indicators, and creating a structure that is going to, what I call, live long beyond me. Or often in a business, I'll be handling something urgent, like, a customer complaint or something goes wrong. And my first thought is just the way my brain works is how do we make sure this never happens again? And instead of, if there's broken glass on the floor, as a silly example, instead of thinking about, okay, where's a dustpan to clean this up? I'm thinking, can we make this floor rubber so no glass ever breaks on it again? And that's where my mind goes, is how do we make sure this never happens again? And so I'm constantly in the structure building mode. And what it does is it allows me to get to a point in every one of my businesses where I can walk away and they can continue to produce without me being there day to day. So with most of those companies, I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations. I'm still the CEO. I'm still the majority shareholder, and I still get the calls when they need me. But it's the structure is sound.
The example you gave of the glass on the floor, I think, brings up such a great point that we talk about a lot in this podcast. And that is, sometimes we worry too much about the effect and we forget about the cause. And I think what you're saying is that causes lead to effects, causes lead to outcome. And we need to address the root cause, change that, systematize that, process or policy that. And then that will lead to outcomes and objectives and results that we're looking for. Is that what we're talking about?
That's absolutely it. Yeah. And it's interesting the way you refer to it with cause and effect. I often will refer to it as importance versus urgency. And so when I talk about time management, I draw this little quadrant that we don't need to get into now, but there's all these different areas on this quadrant, and you can either be, and I will ask a question when I'm doing a talk to a big group of people. I'll say, well, if out of these four quadrants, which one should you spend the most time in? And, one of them is urgent and important. One is important but not urgent. One is urgent but not important. And then one is neither important nor urgent. And probably 80% of the room will almost always say, well, of course, you should do the things that are important and they're urgent. And that's the wrong answer, because what you really want to spend most of your time doing is doing things that are important but not yet urgent. So when we talk about the cause and effect, and you talked about the root cause, when something goes wrong, discovering the root cause is important, but it's never urgent, right? Whereas trying to clean up the glass or fix the problem or make the customer happy or, do whatever it is that you're trying to do, that's the thing that's urgent. And as human beings, look at who we idolize. Look at the top movies. The movies would be superheroes, right? So we want to see Superman coming in at the last minute and rescuing people because we like urgency. We like someone who comes in and saves people from a burning building in the last minute. No one makes movies about a superhero who, plans really well and builds structure so that buildings don't fall and right. And so for that reason, it's kind of the superhero culture. And when it comes to business, especially, I'm very, very big on spending as much time or more time doing the important things that are not yet urgent as I do doing the things that are urgent.
I think there's a lot of listeners right now that went right down the same trap that I did as you walk through the 4 quadrants thinking, yeah, of course, important and urgent. That's where I need to spend my time. But as you talked about that, it really reiterated to me what I think is one of the major future problems. And maybe it's not so future, maybe it's a current problem that we have nationwide, worldwide, community-wide, industry-wide in leadership. And that is we spend far too much time reacting to problems and solving things that have already happened and not enough time proactive. And I think that comes from us constantly being busy and not ever taking time to be still or to think through or to plan ahead. So tell me a little bit about the importance of strategic planning and thinking ahead, being proactive as opposed to being reactive in a leadership position.
Absolutely. In any kind of a leadership position, if you're spending most of your time reacting to what's happening in your environment, you're essentially going to build yourself a scenario where the more you react to things, the more there will be things to react to. One, because naturally, you won't be working on the infrastructure and the systems and the procedures and the policies and the things that are going to ensure that those urgent things don't happen as much. So that's the first reason. The second reason is, we're dealing with other human beings. So guess what? If everyone knows that you're the best firefighter in town, guess who they go to when there's a fire? They go to you. And what if it's a small fire that they can put out themselves? It's a lot easier to just go to you, right? And so what happens is you become a firefighter and you're constantly in this mode of reacting to what's happening. And, often when I draw my quadrant, people will say, well, why would you ever do something what would you ever define as something that's urgent and it's not even important? That doesn't make sense. And I say, sure, it does. It's not important to you, but it's important to someone else. Right. So someone else is making their problem your problem. And those are the things that those who spend most of their time being reactionary, that's what they get into. And so it's critical as a leader. And if you really want to get to those higher levels where, you're running very big departments or divisions or companies and multiple companies, but even in a small business or even in an entry level management role, if you are able to focus on doing the important things as much as you do the urgent and important things, you're going to set yourself up for massive success in the future. And I think for most leaders, that's the one area they lack. And one kind of interesting example, you mentioned society today, I'll give you is think about how we, I'm 42 years old. So I remember what life was like before cell phones. Let's say we had plans to go to the park with family, right? Well, what we would do is we'd get on the phone, right, and say, okay, so we're going to go to the park on Sunday. Great. What time are we going to go? And they'd say, whatever time. I said, great. What's the address? Which part of the park are you going to be in? How should we dress? What kind of food do you want me to bring? And we would sit there. There'd be like this 2-minute, call it a strategy session or just communication, and we'd write all that down. And guess what? Lo and behold, Sunday, 2 p.m., the right park, the right part of, the right bench. We'd bring the right things and all that. Well, 2 weeks ago, my family had a barbecue. My parents and, all these family members had a barbecue, and I was supposed to go to the park with the kids. Well, I didn't ask anyone where I was. I didn't where it was. I didn't ask anyone what time it was. I didn't ask them what they need me to bring. Why? Because I could just be reactionary. In the moment, I can just text them, right? And say, hey, what park are we going to again? Is it 2 or 3? I don't remember. I didn't write any of this stuff down. And where are you guys sitting? And, do you want me to pick anything up? And last minute, well, guess what? I was late and no one was answering my text. So I'm literally parked on the side of the freeway and not knowing what park everyone's at. And it hit me at that moment to go, my gosh, this would never have happened before cell phones, because I knew I couldn't possibly get away with not knowing. But with cell phones, I'm able to get away with it. So you take that analogy, and I think a lot of businesses and a lot of business owners these days function in that same way, is that they're relying on that last minute go in and save the day kind of thing. Just as today we rely on those cell phones to save our butts when we don't know where we're going or when we're supposed to be there.
This is such a terrific example. I'm so glad that you brought it up, because it really drives home. I think the listeners can really relate to what you're talking about here, because you're absolutely right. And by the way, I'm 42. I grew up in the days before cell phones as well, and I know exactly what you're talking about. And I remember stopping at 7-Eleven and putting a quarter in the phone in order to catch up and make sure that I was on the right page. So this is an important lesson that you just walked us through. And we as leaders need to return somewhat to those days of preparing, strategizing, anticipating what's going to happen and what needs we have. And then it's not fighting fires all the time. Then it's strategically moving forward. Now, Arman, really one of the things that I wanted to make sure that you and I talked about, because you are an expert in KPIs, key performance indicators, and I think a lot of listeners, including myself, really struggle with this. We understand what they are. We know they're important, and yet we're not implementing them. We're not using them. And so talk to us a little bit about why KPIs are the absolute secret to success as a CEO, and why we struggle so much with this.
Yeah, great question. Great question. So you said I'm very passionate, or I forget what the adjective you used was, about KPIs. I like to say I'm obsessed with KPIs because, and I hope that everyone out there listening, whether you're a manager or you're a business owner, I hope I can get you as of today to become obsessed with KPIs. And the reason for it is this: if you have the right key performance indicators, you can anticipate what is going to happen in your business. You can see what happened in your business today without actually having to be there. And you can plan ahead in ways that those without KPIs absolutely cannot do. Now, for many, many years, what I used to do is I used to preach this, and I told people you have to implement KPIs and all this. And for most of the time when I was getting feedback, immediately like, oh my gosh, Arman, it's a great idea. But then what I would see is that months later and years later, I realized that they weren't implementing this stuff. Until I started coaching CEOs one-on-one and being an advisor to some companies, and realizing that a lot of people think of KPIs as some like big picture, thing that, it's the revenue of the company and, your gross profit and this and that. And yes, those are KPIs. But the KPIs I'm talking about are the day-to-day numbers that you need to track in order to make sure that you succeed. So, for example, if I'm talking to an attorney, right? Let's say it's an attorney who's trying to get to the next level. What I'm interested in is actually, look, at the end of the day, I want to track how many hours did you work, right? If it's an individual, not a department. Let's track how many hours you actually worked. How many hours did you bill, right? And then how much did you bill? And maybe we come up with some KPIs involving some of the results and some of the different cases that they're working on, and say, why don't you report those on a weekly basis? Now what happens is, on a daily basis, they know that at the end of the day, even if it's a text message they're just sending themselves, they know that at the end of the day, they're accountable to how many hours did I work today, and how many of those hours were billable hours, right? And how much did I actually bill? And when it becomes a daily thing, everything changes. Absolutely everything changes. So I walk into, let's say, a medical practice, and the first thing I say is, as of today, I want to track how many patients we're seeing, right? And they'll say, oh, we already do that. And I say, great. How many patients did you see yesterday? And you see them start counting, or they start like saying, well, let's go look at our paperwork. I said, no. If you're truly doing KPIs, I take it to the next level. I say, you should know, because this should have been a number you glanced at yesterday, and you should know about what your average is. And so you should know if you were a little bit above average, below average, or way above or way below. If you go up to, I'm a Los Angeles guy, so if I go up to LeBron James after, the day after a game, and I say, hey, LeBron, how many points did you have? He doesn't say, let me go check the stats. He tells me how many points he had, because he watches those numbers. And he may be off by 2 points, but trust me, he's not going to say 50 if he only had 20. And you see in a lot of businesses that people don't know those numbers. So in that medical practice, how many patients did you see? How much cash collections did you have? In the last month, which is how billing happens, how much billing collections did we have? And you start to track these numbers, again, on a daily basis. And what I like KPIs to flow from the bottom up, meaning if you own a company or you manage a department, the people on the ground level should be sending these KPIs up on a daily basis and then having them roll into weeks and months. And they flow up through management. So by the end of the day today, in fact, part of this will happen while I'm doing other things. I could be on vacation. I will get statistics on how every one of my companies did in every area that I care about. And the way I get that is that those numbers start to roll up. Now they become less and less detailed the higher up they go through management. So if there's 3 layers of management, someone reports it to their supervisor, the supervisor goes to the manager goes to a VP, and the VP is sending it to me. But by the time he gets to what the VP sends me, he's sending me maybe 4 metrics that tell me everything happening under him. And the key is that they're happening on a daily basis. And when I used to do this, we used to set up fancy KPI dashboards and things like that. But today, I highly recommend actually getting away from that stuff and just using text messages. It's the most effective way of getting the numbers. And I prefer it over emails because I feel like email becomes a bit cumbersome and you have to go dig into it. And for email, you have to actively go after it, whereas text messages kind of haunt you, right? So they come to you actively. And I like them actively coming to me or going to the people that I'm managing.
So let me ask you this about KPIs, because what I hear you saying is that the struggle we're having isn't necessarily in setting KPIs. It's not in the things we know what we want to measure. We know what we need to measure within our business. What I hear you saying is that where we're falling down, where we're struggling as leaders is in the accountability, is in the tracking, is in the really being aware and attuned with your numbers. We know that our team is tracking these numbers, but we're not aware on a daily basis what those numbers mean and what they're saying to us. Is that what I hear?
That is absolutely correct. And when you say we know our team is tracking them, I would say actually I don't know that our teams are tracking them and individuals are tracking them. I find salespeople whose livelihood depends on the commission they earn. And I find that when we go into these companies and I'm brought in as an advisor and they say, and some of them could be pretty big companies, right? You go in and they say, well, our sales team is struggling. I say, okay, let's go talk to 5 of your sales reps. And I talk to them and I say, tell me about your sales numbers the last week. And they kind of give me this stare and then they start telling me about the accounts that they're going after. They start telling me stories, right? Mm-hmm. They'll say, oh, well, I'm going after, this company and that company. And I said, no, I didn't ask you to tell me a story. I want you to give me the numbers. How many cold calls did you make last week? Of those cold calls, how many of them answered the phone? Of the people who answered the phone, how many of them did you get a decision maker? Of the ones who had a decision maker, how many did you have a meaningful conversation with? Of the ones you had a meaningful conversation with, how many did you get an appointment with, right? And of the ones you had an appointment with, so on and so forth. So that's your sales funnel. For a salesperson, that's the critical thing to everything that you do. So I've had a couple of real estate businesses bring me in, and the first thing that I do is I say there's a sales funnel and everyone's a part of it. So every rep at the end of the day sends their sales numbers. And it's basically what I just described. Now, if they're going out and knocking on doors one day, well, how many doors did you knock on? How many people answer the door and things like that? And you become obsessed with those numbers. And where I got this from is interesting. I mean, I was an athlete growing up. As a kid, I played basketball, I played football. Mm-hmm. And so as an athlete, everything you do is tracked, right? And so you have a bad day on the basketball court and everyone is making fun of you. All your teammates are saying, oh man, you had 7 turnovers, or gosh, your shooting percentage was only 25%. Did they remind you, right?
Right.
And so I went into business and I realized, my gosh, no one's keeping track of anything anyone does. Supposedly there was tracking, but no one was talking about the numbers. And so I made this leap where I made it where the numbers became the conversation. And as the numbers became the conversation, and early on in my career, I was in retail and in wireless, actually retail. And I realized, my gosh, sales numbers are starting to go through the roof. And all it is that everyone is accountable to their KPIs of those specific daily numbers. And it's all day, every day we're thinking about them. And if they ever miss KPIs, any of my companies to this day, if I don't get my KPIs, almost always I will know I didn't get them, and I'll message them and say, what's going on? Where are my KPIs? Because at first it's very hard to set up. People don't follow through. But once it becomes a must do, suddenly they start doing it. And what happens is just by the fact that they're reporting the KPIs up through management, they start becoming more aware of it. And when they have a bad day, they're aware they had a bad day. And when they have a great day, now we have reason to celebrate.
And when you're a manager, when you're a leader, when you're working with this team, do you have an optimal number of KPIs? I mean, do you try to keep it, let's target the top 3 things we want you to measure, or is each position, each scenario different?
Such a great question. Absolutely. Each position is going to be different. But what I can tell you is 3 to 5 is a sweet spot. And I really like having it be close to somewhere between 3 and 5. In some cases, you can have up to 7. You can have 8 or 9. But the thing is this, is when it gets up to, let's say, I have some companies where I'll get a set of 9 KPIs. But when I'm getting 9 KPIs, there's no way my brain can process 9 pieces of information. But the reason I do it where I still have 9 KPIs coming is because I want the people under me to have to report that data, because I want them to be aware of it. So it's good for them, not necessarily good for me. The calculation of it benefits them, but seeing it doesn't necessarily benefit me. And so what ends up happening in those cases, maybe there's 9 KPIs, but I'm only looking at 3 or 4. And one of the things, since we're on this topic, one of the things related to this is I always talk about KPIs as you'll know you have true KPIs that are Arman Sedeghi approved when you can draw me a picture of the KPI text that you're going to get. And I'll actually have people do this. But my coaching clients, people who've only worked with me for a few months, I'll say, okay, I'll pull out a blank sheet of paper and I say, draw me the text message. And they'll say, what? I'll say, draw it for me. I want you to tell me, like, where are the words? How big is each word? Where does the number sit? So like, if it's, I don't know, number of patients or billable hours or whatever it is, cold calls. Tell me where it is, and I'll have them sort of draw a picture, and then I'll have them fill in some of the numbers. I'll say, tell me where you were at yesterday. And then I'll say, tell me where you're at month to date. And then the number I love is tracking. What are you tracking for the month? I love that number. And what happens is I have them tell me this stuff, and then I say, okay, now pull out your text. Let's look at them. And what you'll see is the people who established a sort of a picture of their KPIs are the ones who truly grasp KPIs, because now when they look at it, they're not sitting there and actually reading it, right? It's just they glance at it, and in an instant they see, God, we had a great day. Oh no, we had a terrible day. Or, they can respond to their team and congratulate them on their success, or maybe reprimand some people, whatever the case may be. But it's all about developing that picture. And like today, if we're sitting here and it's the last day of the month or the first day of the month or the middle of the month, we should know where we're tracking to be at for the month. And certain things like that will help your team reach levels that you never thought possible. Because if it's the 5th of the month and someone has, made 100 calls, and you do the math and you go, okay, well, if this same trend continues, you're going to be at, let's say, 1,000 calls by the end of the month. Someone looks at that and goes, oh my gosh, the most calls I've ever made is 600. Well, because you keep KPIs, right? They know that. And they say, my gosh, that's it. So that's all I have to do is do this for 25 more days, and I can be at 1,000 calls, and then it'll mean I make this much money. And the next thing you know, everything changes, and people start doing things that they thought they were never capable of before.
So the big takeaway from this episode, if you're paying attention at home, be obsessed with key performance indicators. It is the key to success as a leader. It's the key to success as a manager. It's the key to success as an employee, as a worker in the business. Be obsessed with your numbers. Know them inside and out. And the one to really focus on is this tracking. How are you tracking for the month, for the week, for the day? How are you in relation to your goals? Arman, this is a terrific conversation. I wish we could keep going. I want to jump into the business Bible and everything else that you've got going on. But alas, our podcast time is running to an end. It's time for us to shift gears and talk about learning from leaders. Are you ready?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So our first question is the book currently on your Kindle or bedside table. What are you reading today?
I happened to just pick up an old favorite of mine, which is Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Just trying to brush up on some of my basics of taking care of the finances.
Yeah, and I love that book, and it's a tried and tested and true, and sometimes you just got to open them back up and refresh your memory. What a great book. How about your leadership superpower?
Well, my leadership superpower, we kind of took the thunder away, but it would be KPIs. KPIs everywhere.
Is anybody surprised to hear Arman talk about KPIs being his superpower? But I tell you what, if you've got that superpower, you could translate that into profitability. You could translate that into revenue growth. You could translate that into success in all walks of life, not just business. It's a great superpower. Our next question then is a motivational quote, philosophy, or mantra, something that you live by.
I heard a great quote a long time ago, and it's to be happy with who you are and what you have while pursuing everything that you want. And I live it every day in my businesses, with the people I deal with, and in my personal life, to just be happy with who I am and what I have, but not ever giving up on everything that I want.
Yeah, so terrific and so important. Happiness is not a destination. It's a journey. It's part of the process. And I heard Sean Achor talk just the other day. He wrote The Happiness Advantage, and he talked about they have found statistically and scientifically proven that success does not lead to greater happiness, but happiness always leads to greater success. And so such a important mantra that you live by. Our final question then, Arman, is the book you most often gift or refer to other people.
That's the easiest one ever. It would be How to Win Friends and Influence People. I think it's, in my personal opinion, I think it's the best book ever written. And I've read a lot of books, and I've written a few books. So it takes a lot for me to say that. But I don't care if someone's out there and listening, and they're a 10-year-old kid, or they're 99 years old, in business or not, man, woman, it doesn't matter. Greatest book of all time, How to Win Friends and Influence People, will help you in the business world, I think, more than any business book you could ever read.
And we call that a top shelf book. So great recommendation. Arman, this has been a great conversation. I love this idea of KPIs. It's exactly what I wanted to focus on today. It's been so helpful. Before we let you go, any last bit of advice, and then tell us, how can we pick up the Business Bible or any of your books, and how can we connect with you?
Absolutely. My last takeaway would be, we talked about importance versus urgency to start with, and then we talked about KPIs. And what I would say is probably the most important thing in any business or any company, and by far the least urgent of anything you can do, is track KPIs. And that's exactly why they're so important. And the way to get a hold of me or to find me, a Business Bible, you can pick it up on Amazon. Or just about anywhere. I'm on Instagram. I use Instagram a lot to put out videos and content to help people. My Instagram is at ArmaniOC, ARMANIOC. And I also have a podcast called the Titanium Life Podcast. It's a mixture of business as well as some tips just for CEOs living life. So I talk about kids and marriage and everything else, finances, but a lot of it is specifically about business. And my website is titaniumsuccess.com. I'm always interested in connecting with people. So if there's anyone out there who heard this and loved what I had to say, Instagram is probably the best way to connect with me and ask me your questions and delve a little bit deeper into the things that you heard today.
Well, very cool. And we'll link all of that up on the show notes so they have one-stop destination to go and get all of the goodness that we talked about today. Arman, this has been a terrific conversation. Thank you for coming on. You truly are a modern leader, and you were a great guest. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a wonderful day.
All right, my friends, what did you think of that? I really enjoyed that conversation. Boy, I tell you, KPIs have become such an important part of my business, of the people that I work with, the people that I work on coaching with. All of this has been so important. I'm glad that we were able to walk through some of these great stories and really envision in our minds the importance of not just having KPIs, but the accountability of tracking them and reporting on them up the ladder to make our business decisions. By the way, I forgot to wish you a very happy Halloween if you are in the United States and you're listening to this on the day it goes out. I hope that you're enjoying a little trick-or-treating with the kiddos or whatever else you're doing today. Until next week. Oh, I almost forgot. All of the things that we talked about in this episode can be found at jakeacarlson.com/ML144, episode 144. And that's where we'll have the links to the books and the quotes and everything else to connect with Arman. Until next week, I want to wish you the very best of days, an even better life. And remember, everything is figure-outable. Thanks for listening to the Modern Leadership Podcast. You can find me on Facebook at Speaker Jake, on Twitter at Jake A. Carlson, and of course the website, jakeacarlson.com. See you there.